Hi, today we are talking to Dejan Kršić, whom I will introduce in a threefold way. Let's say starting from the general to the more specific aspects of Dejan's career and his profile. The most general context of Dejan's interests is something I would call archaeology of Yugoslav visual culture, where being also professor at the Arts Academy in Split and involved in many projects recovering some important landmarks and milestones of Yugoslav's socialist visual culture, Dejan belongs, I would claim, to very most important people within the field. A second more narrow context to pinpoint Dejan is that since early 1990s, together most importantly with Boris Buden, he had been the driving force of the Arczin collective, the journal, also important back then, small but very important publishing house, where Dejan then in the 90s by himself has become an important actor within not just Croatia, but what was back already then called ex-Yugoslavia or post-Yugoslavia, whatever we label it. And then the third, the most specific aspect of Dejan's activities and related to the book we have published is that Dejan has been the designer of the Žilnik-Buden volume Past, an Introduction to the Problem. But beside that, Dejan was also typeset, and actually he was the graphic designer of another Žilnik-related volume that was published, chiefly published by the curators collective VHV. This is the volume Shadow Citizens, published in 2019. Also in relation to the exhibition in Germany, and then later on that exhibition traveled also to Vienna, to Kunsthalle in Vienna. So let's say those would be three contexts. I would say that Dejan is an important figure, and also a figure related to both the authors of the book, so Žilnik and Buden. My first question to you, Dejan, would be, I mean, the more specific, you are some 17 years younger than Želimir is. How actually Žilnik has entered your life as a young intellectual and then as a graphic designer? Was it already in the 80s, or was it then something that actually just got in the 90s, that you got acquainted with his work and his posture?
Yeah. First of all, you are too kind in your general introduction to my little person and work. I really don't feel so special or whatever, expert or on anything. Just trying to do and solve whatever things and problems we have in design or in the local history of the graphic design mostly, you know. But regarding Žilnik, I'm sure I've seen some of his early movies, like whatever it's called.
Rani Radovi?
Rani Radovi, early works. Yes. Somewhere in the 80s, etc. But I wasn't so, I must admit, I wasn't so interested in his work, you know. Mostly Branko Vučićević, Makavejev, you know, that part of a Yugoslav scene was somehow something that was more interesting or more appealing to me. And then I also somehow through some friends, Žarana Papić, got introduced and got to know Branko Vučićević, and we stayed in a really
But this was then in the 90s or still?
That was in the late 80s already. And we stayed in touch until his death. But Žilnik more entered later in the 90s when his new works, new films, new video films or whatever they are called, were something that made some kind of, what's the proper word for that?
Impact. No?
Not only impact, but somehow intervened into local situation with the Tito, and those films, and then, of course, with the interest of VHV and all the projects where he got either his films or screenings or really the whole exhibitions of his work, like these Shadow Citizens. We had that first in Germany and then in Kunsthalle Wien, larger exhibition, extended exhibition. The one in Germany or wherever it was, in which town, was some kind of a smaller really setup. It was somehow introduction to that whole subject, how to do exhibition about film artists. And I think that it is really developed in that huge exhibition in Kunsthalle, which had the same title, but it's basically the different exhibition.
But tell me, if, let's say, what you also now just said, that Žilnik as a filmmaker was maybe rather not that it was not your cup of tea, but it was not your main interest. But tell me, had you still the feeling in the, let's say, in your 20s, so let's say in the 1980s in Yugoslavia, had been Žilnik some intellectual reference for you as an intellectual, not just as a filmmaker, or was it rather marginal?
I wouldn't say. I think he was more marginal, but I also think that it somehow had to do with that whole position of artists like him in the 80s, that was somehow really on the margin of the interest, because various reasons. General style of the whatever, postmodernism of the time, dominance of the neue slowenische Kunst, etc., etc., So these things were something that captured our imagination. These, let's say, older artists or filmmakers like Žilnik were somehow on the side, but also because they are somehow socially and in the film industry of the time, I believe that were also somehow on the side. Not because they were some great dissidents or something like that, but somehow, let's say, structurally, that they were on the margins. And therefore, for me, for my circle, or let's say the generation, perhaps he wasn't so influential at that time. These older films like Rani Radovi and that whole story about strip, comic Sloboda strip, that all somehow started to matter more later in the 90s in the retrospective. Somehow, perhaps similar situation was with artists like Mladen Stilinović, and those kind of artists, that were really important in the 80s and were some kind of a local reference, but really didn't have huge exhibitions. Nobody really considered them. You are the most important, whatever, artist of the generation, etc., etc. But they were still on the margins, partly because that was their personal position. They somehow felt like that, but also structurally that they could get some kind of exhibition. But it's those guys that exhibit on the streets, they have those little pieces of paper, with something typed on or whatever. It wasn't that, let's say, even accepted, in the general circle. And in the 90s, it became huge, but also largely very much because of the foreign acceptance and using them as a reference, selecting them as the representatives of the culture of the time of the 80s, of the whatever early ages. So that process of a sort of selection of the artist in the 90s was very much important for our situation today, whom we see as a relevant artist today. It's really good that we got a good artist. But, you know, in the 80s, it was, you know, I don't know, painters, you know, something that was new image, etc., etc. That was something that the structures, that the galleries, that the museums, you know, somehow pushed, promoted. That was rather big in the media.
Yeah. You know, I mean, one interesting point to come now more closely also to what you have done in the 19th with Argzin was, I would claim that, I mean, you now just already now stated that you would think that the foreign, I mean, outside or outside of out of Yugoslav reception of artists like Žilnik or Stilinovic or some other names we also could drop in. Yeah, that this was, let's say, the moment where actually they got famous in a way locally by their international recognition. Yes, I would probably say, I mean, and this is a whole another now topic of how it went, but there was something specific I would maybe also say to what you have done with Argzin in many regards. But I would just tell one thing, which in a way I think connects you with Žilnik, both you, Dejan, Boris, others with Žilnik, and this is the do-it-yourself approach. That this is something that even maybe it seems like that already then in the 90s, you told already that, Žilnik, for example, like Stilinovic, marginalized, very specific position in the 70s, in the 80s, within the official framework of Yugoslav cultural production, be it visual arts or film. But this very ethos of DIY, do it yourself, that this is something that Argzin was promoting a lot and actually made some kind of gesture, not just towards the thriving nationalist discourse around and the wartime. I mean, not to forget that the 90s of Yugoslavia were wartime, but also going then against the academic or whatever canonizing discourse. So DIY. Could you maybe just tell more a bit about
I wouldn't say that we had the direct connection that somehow Žilnik's do-it-yourself approach somehow influenced our, but perhaps we had the same roots in whatever it was that youth culture, youth scene in the former Yugoslavia. You know, he was somehow connected with that whatever it's called, Tribina Mladih.
In Novi Sad, yes.
In Novi Sad, you know. We in Zagreb, we somehow took a lot of those stuff from the local youth papers like Polet, Studentski List, etc., etc. So I think that partly that came from that sources or that environment or those influences, but also, you know, in the 80s we had a lot of that do-it-yourself thing from punk, from new wave, from, I don't know, it wasn't huge influence here, but we knew and we had that, we mostly read about it, then it was somehow musical really influence, Geniale Dilettanten from Germany, etc., etc. So I think that this somehow things, you know, connected somewhere in the 80s, and in the end it was the only thing that you could do in the 90s. Sorry, you know, we didn't have any kind of structural support that came with the Soros, which was mostly financial thing to do. But then when you have those financial resources, what can you do here? How can you produce the newspapers? How do you communicate with the authors, journalists, etc., etc.? That is something that somehow, you know, was very much in the spirit of the time, in the local economical and social situation.
Yeah. And tell me also one thing. I mean, this is important for the context. I mean, talking about the DIY approach and self-consciously chosen marginal position that was quite many times stated in Argzin, be it in Boris's columns or the way also the journal had looked like, was designed. But there was also, I would say, something which is maybe shared with Žilnik, though the generation gap is sometimes, I mean, there are nuances in the way. So that for Želimir, it is not just about DIY, but this kind of hybrid thing where you produce a situation, how marginal a situation or the context is, let's say, be it the gay people or trans people, be it the Roma, be it the unemployed. There is a specific still intention, though you coming from a marginal position, that sometimes you could in a way get lucky or maybe not lucky, that your intervention in a way produces a real social effect. I mean that your intervention, be it as Luddite, Luddistic, artistic or whatever, DIY-ish, underground, that some or punkish, that it produces some real social effect. And this, I think also, I mean, was it ever for you, I mean, the issue that you had this confidence, let's say, especially in the 90s, that even doing something which for many on the left liberal part of not just the Croatian side was deemed to be snobbish, elitist, just underground, that was it ever, I mean, your intention, I mean, or had you played someone like Žilnik or Stilinović a role for you, role model, that you had still this confidence that whatever kind of underground this is, you still can in a way produce some real social effects?
I think that was definitely, the case. But we were somehow, I don't know, intuitive or naive about it, And then with Buden's theoretical reflection, it became our, stated position, We were simply marginal because it was the group or newspaper or whatever editorial board that consisted of every minority that was somehow, persecuted or in bad situation in Croatia at that time. Serbs, punks, gays, lesbians, whatever, eco-punks, etc., all that situation, group of the people. But Buden gave it some kind of theoretical reference and said, that is the real position in this political, social, etc. situation. And we said, yeah, of course, that's what we thought from the beginning. But just he was really important in stating that in a paper, in a manifesto, let's say it form, What could I say about it? You had so long question that I forgot the beginning. But
I mean, were you confident?
Definitely, we were sort of confident, But several years, decade, whatever later, you really felt the result of that, because suddenly people came to you and said, I was a kid in a high school in some godforsaken place in Croatia, but nobody understood me, and I managed to get that only copy of Argzin that got there, and I've read it, and it was very important to me, and blah, 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 So it's sort of, and then you see, yes, if you influenced life of 5, 10, whatever persons like that, it really made sense. It was the not fact that we have published a very strong article against Tudjman or something like that, but that you provided some kind of window or connection and feeling that you are not alone for somebody wherever.
But tell me, I mean, what do you say as a person, again, from, let's say, mid-80s, you were around, you said that, let's say, with someone like Žilnik, or again, Stilinović as a parallel, say that the international reception and the recognition in a way made them important here for the local context of Croatia, Serbia, and Yugoslavia altogether. And now, I mean, you have been also involved, like also I am, and this for the last 2 decades, in some cases like Stilinovic or Sanja Ivekovic, so we could go on with the different names, is that the circuit, they have become household names within, for example, Stilinovic or Sanja Ivekovic, they hang in the MoMA, New York. Žilnik has been shown throughout the world almost on a daily basis in cinematheques and still on retrospectives organized by him. But what do you say? If this initial move also for the culture operators like we are, like if 20 years ago the interest of big curator names or institutions from the West in a way made those artists like Žilnik or Stilinovic important for our own local context. What would you say, now after 20 years? Is it that...
Will we go to MoMA?
Yeah,
Will we hang in MoMA?
Yeah. What do you think? Is it now that in some way those artists have become international? Or do you maybe have a kind of a thing where even now us speaking about the translation of book or conversation of Boris's and Želimir's, there quite many references are so subtle Yugoslav ironies and sarcasms and criticism are so minute that for someone coming not from Yugoslavia, it's almost impenetrable of how minute those sarcasms or witticisms are. What do you think? What do you say now, especially also with your experience of being part of a collective VHV who put out Žilnik on the exhibition? What do you say? How do you feel about it? And now this is also my question. How you deal with let's say, with artists who in a way are so embedded into their context, but then have become global names, and then on quite many occasions, actually, you are talking with people who are missing much of the, let's say, Yugoslav or post-Yugoslav context.
It's a really huge question with different levels. But the bottom line, I would say, all that matters is the work. Žilnik had great films. They were great in the 70s, they were great in the 80s, they were great in the 90s. So the fact that he was or wasn't recognized at a certain point, it's some kind of result of a certain situation, of a trend, socio-economic, blah, 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 blah. He had his films in film festivals in the 70s, in the 80s. He got award in...
Already in the 60s, yes.
Already in the 60s. So he wasn't unknown, but sort of a level where he was positioned in some kind of historical overview was somewhere lower on the margins, not interested, etc., etc. Similar with all these artists like Tom Gotovac and Stilinovic, Sanja Ivekovic. They had exhibitions outside of Yugoslavia. They had connections to some foreign curators, etc. But in the general structure of the art scene, they were really marginal. They couldn't penetrate and couldn't have the exhibition at the MoMA at the certain times without sacrificing something like what Braco Dimitrijevic did. He moved to Paris, to London, and then he became an international artist. With the whole change of the situation, suddenly these artists became interested, and whatever, world curators, public audience, understood, recognized something that is important in their work because it was a good work. So, when you wait long enough, if you have certain time, some things really become interesting because things are changing, trends are changing, etc., etc. I believe that now interest in the so-called Balkans art is not so huge in Western Europe or globally as it was, 10 years or 15 years ago. But still, artists like Žilnik, like Sanja Ivekovic, like Tom Gotovac, they are important. They have managed to put their foot in the door and somehow become almost the household names. We are trying to do that with design now. That's something, the other thing that I do. Just somehow document, hold that history of Yugoslav, basically, design that is really undocumented, that doesn't exist on some kind of global map. Even those guys had the connections with the foreign designers, curators, exhibitions, etc., etc.
Yeah. And maybe just to close a question, which is also, goes, I would say, both for you and I, personal. You also think that for myself, the most important film, or still the most impressive film of Žilnik, among so many other different things he has done, is a film where our mutual friend Branimir Stanović Trša had played, so The Old School of Capitalism, which in so many ways is interesting, and interesting, for example, in the sense that Žilnik, like in his early works, so late 60s, already in a way his friends are on screen who are already known celebrities, at least, or important figures within Yugoslav culture of that time, very much like in The Old School of Capitalism, where Želimir stages dialogue, conversations on screen in between different political agenda even, or sensibilities. So approach which would be kind of populist anarchist, and then the other one would be more of the elitist, like high modernist, Lacanian, whatever we call it. That is in a way always suspicious of the masses and of the popular movements. Do you have maybe like your? I opened my card, so I would say Old School of Capitalism. What would be for you the favorite Žilnik movie?
I don't know. I will stick with the two early ones, but that's more personal than filmophile or whatever, connoisseur of the good films decision. The Rani Radovi and whatever is the student strike.
The Lipanska Gibanja.
Lipanska Gibanja.
Yes.
I haven't seen all of his films also, I must admit. I know them from the stills and a lot of texts that were written that they had to design. What would be I think Tito is somehow something that is very, sort of struck me at a certain time. But it's certainly not a film's critic position or choice, So it was somehow very personal or something connected with the time and references that you have from your whatever life connections, stuff like that.
Yeah,
I don't know. Is it a good answer? But
thank you.
It's the best one that I can give.
Thank you, Dan. So it's maybe also just for the ones who will listen to this podcast. It's hopefully. So Dan was also designing a volume that we have co-published on Tom Gotovac, written by Slobodan Šijan. The international edition, so English edition of it, and hopefully so as a kind of a continuation of kind of digging up for the international audience of primary documents of Yugoslav culture. Hopefully, this is quite soon figure also so important to Žilnik. That would be a volume in English of writings by Branko Vučićević. Yes, so
I have also a historical debt to make that book about Splav Meduze, the raft of Medusa that Branko Vučićević agreed to make several years before he died, and we didn't finish that before his death, so I still have to do it. It will be some kind of a paper movie around Splav Meduze film by Harpo Godina that he made the script, and I always claim that those films are his films, not much less than Harpo Godina's movies.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.